Hello and a warm welcome back to everyone to this session on pump storage hydropower deployment. We spent the morning talking about the ASEAN power grid and the regulatory and financing bottlenecks for cross-border infrastructure. Pump storage hydropower is where some of these themes converge. PSH stabilizes grids, unlocks higher renewable penetration, and supports regional power trade. But the path to bankability remains complex, and despite its many benefits, pump storage hydropower is not a mainstream part of APG yet. To start this session, I would like to welcome to the stage Mr. Takeo Koike, Head of the Office of Markets Development and Public-Private Partnerships at ADB, to deliver the welcome address. Takeo.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And then good afternoon, colleagues, partners, and then friends. Welcome back to the Asian Green Energy Forum, and then to our very important session focusing on the ASEAN Power Grid. It's a pleasure to open this session on the topic that is both technically complex and then strategically essential for ASEAN's energy future, the role of pumped storage hydropower in enabling regional power integration. We heard in the morning about the technical, policy, regulatory, and then environmental and social impediments, the financial challenges, and then also practical solutions to move forward. I will not go through those kind of again, but it's clear that over the past decade, ASEAN has made visible progress in expanding renewable energy and also practical and strengthening cross-border interconnections. We now see more discussions about bilateral power trade, clearer national targets, and a growing momentum behind the ASEAN Power Grid vision. But then as a variable renewables scale rapidly, we have also seen that region lacks sufficient long duration grid scale flexibility. This is where pumped storage hydropower comes in. Pumped storage hydros is not a new technology. It plays a vital role in balancing the grid and then ensuring stability because it's proven to be a long duration storage technology at scale. What has changed now is that its use cases and then impact are becoming more prominent, and its need to take the ASEAN Power Grid to the next stage is becoming more urgent. Across the region, pumped storage hydros are moving from concept to early development. In the Philippines, we have seen big success with the 797 megawatt Kalilaya Botokan Kalayan or CBK hydroelectric power plant complex, which was officially privatized by the Philippine government to a consortium led by Aboitiz Renewables, which was signed in December 2025. The takeover marked one of the largest hydropower acquisitions in the country, with the facility expected to play a key role in safeguarding grid reliability and then helping prevent power disruptions in the future. We'll be diving deep into that project, what it means for the Philippines and its implications for ASEAN in the upcoming panel discussion. Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand have integrated pumped storage hydropower into their long-term power development strategies, while Laos PDR and Malaysia are exploring pumped storage hydros as a part of broader export-oriented strategies. These are encouraging signals, but they are not enough. To unlock private pumped storage hydros at scale, and then especially to enable cross-border pumped storage hydropower that supports regional balancing in ASEAN, we must tackle three structural challenges. First is bankability. Pumped storage hydros require large upfront capital, long lead times, and the revenue certainty. Today, most ASEAN markets do not provide the pricing signals or ancillary service frameworks that will allow investors to value flexibility and then storage duration. Without predictable cash flows, pumped storage hydros remain difficult to finance. Second, regulatory harmonization. Cross-border pumped storage hydros only work if countries align on operating rules, scheduling, compensation, and then risk allocation. At present, frameworks differ widely across ASEAN, creating a barrier to pumped storage hydropower success. I'm sure we will hear more on that from the panel. Third is a risk management, as pumped storage hydropower developers face a unique risk stack. Tools like guarantees, blended finance, and then public-private partnership structures exist, but they are not yet to be systematically applied to pumped storage hydros in the region. There's a good news though. ASEAN has strong regional cooperation platforms, growing experience with cross-border transmission, and then clear understanding of the importance of energy transition, the role of ASEAN Power Grid, and then within that, of pumped storage hydropower. We at ADB are also ready to get pumped storage hydropower projects off the ground and then make them viable as long-term solutions for battery storage. Today's panel brings together exactly the right mix of perspectives to help us set the stage for the next chapter of growth for pumped storage hydropower. I hope this discussion will help us move from recognizing the importance of pumped storage hydros to creating the enabling conditions that make projects investable, sustainable, and then regionally integrated. I thank you all for your support and participation in this important discussion. And then we start. Let me hand the floor to our moderator and then distinguished panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Takeo, for this inspiring message, which is a perfect introduction to the discussion. Before I introduce our group of panelists, please note that you can type your questions in the Wova app under our event page. The title of the event is on the screen. So now to introduce our panelists, first we have Mr. Mario Bernardo, the Chief Executive Officer of EDF Power Solutions Laos. Mario joined EDF in 2010 and has led various energy projects across continent focusing on onshore wind, gas and hydropower, and held regional roles in Africa and Eastern Europe since 2015. As CEO, he manages a company overseeing the MOFI PSH project, utilizing the reservoir of Namton 2 hydropower plant, and serves on the board of directors of Namton 2 Power Company. I would also like to call on stage Ms. Rebecca Ellis, Deputy Head of Policy, International Hydropower Association. Rebecca developed the IHA Power Storage Working Group, which led to the Enabling Investor to De-risk Pump Storage Guidance Note. She provides secretariat for support for the Global Alliance for Pump Storage, which was founded at COP29 and now has over 60 government and organizations participating. We also have Sue Eun Tan, Head of the International Agency Regional Cooperation Center, joining us this afternoon. IEA provides data, analysis, and policy recommendations to shape a secure, sustainable, and inclusive energy future. She leads the center's mission to work with Southeast Asian governments in addressing their energy challenges, including strengthening energy security. Also joining us this afternoon is engineer Ariel Fonda, Chief Science Research Specialist. So Ariel is a Chief Science Research Specialist, Hydropower and Ocean Management Division under the Renewable Energy Management Bureau of the Department of Energy in the Philippines. He currently oversees the formulation and implementation of policies, plans, and programs related to the accelerated development, transformation, utilization, and commercialization of hydropower and ocean energy resources, including emerging energy technologies. Lastly, we have Mr. Philip Napier-Moore. Philip is an energy sector leader for Asia from McDonald. He has supported more than 80 gigawatts of projects in Asia and is continuously focused on the ASEAN power grid and ongoing gigawatt-scale firmed renewable power projects using energy storage and subsea electrical interconnection, importing renewable energy power to Singapore. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today. So maybe let me start with you, Sue Eun. with the current growth of energy demand in ASEAN and the increase of renewable energies, what is the potential of pump storage hydropower in that context?
Yeah, thank you very much. And sorry, thank you very much. And I do have a very loud voice, but I will still use the microphone. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and to the ADB for inviting the International Energy Agency to be part of this very important annual conference. So let me do a bit of zooming out and a bit of scene setting. So in terms of where we see energy demand growth, we see Southeast Asia as having the second largest energy demand growth globally, second only to India. And specifically around electricity demand, for us, ASEAN will be about 50% higher than the global average in terms of electricity demand growth going out over the next 10 years. And next week, in fact, we will launch our biannual Southeast Asia Energy Outlook, which will also cover some of these big trends, but those numbers remain true. I would also add, and I think we need to note, that the current crisis in the Middle East has also really drawn attention to the importance of energy security, and I think particularly for ASEAN as well as for the rest of Asia, including in particular South Asia, the importance of ensuring homegrown domestic energy resources is even more important. And I think in that context, the potential for renewable energy is very great. Let me start first with the variable side of renewable energy. So we did a report last year where we identified that the technical potential of solar as well as onshore and offshore wind is at 20 gigawatts for ASEAN, and that's roughly 55 times the region's current generating capacity. So there is a very large potential of variable renewable energy in there, and tapping even a small fraction of that will go a long way to helping this region decrease its fossil fuel import dependence and increase its energy security. And in that context, the importance of not just batteries, which I know gets a lot of attention and is very critical, but I think also really importantly, the role of pumped storage, hydro, becomes very, very critical, because you need something to help in terms of managing that variable renewable energy coming into the system, helping to provide that flexibility into the power system, and the role of PSH in that context is very, very critical. I just then want to say also on the final point that I want to make on this is we are seeing, and I think Takeo mentioned at the start, some very good steps by governments in this region and Philippines, which I will leave Ariel to share a little bit more on. But we've also seen Thailand obviously already operating pumped storage hydro, and then some very good developments in Cambodia, Laos PDR, and Malaysia in terms of its development. And we see that potential hitting quite a high gigawatts, probably around 15 gigawatts. And I'm sure there will be a number that Rebecca will share later, but it should be pretty similar. And now the question is exactly how then do we tap into that potential, and what the role is for both regulators to have the right conditions that then attract private sector investment, which I'm sure we will talk about later. Thanks.
Thank you, Suren. You've mentioned the example of the Philippines, and I'm turning to you, Ariel. The Philippines have pioneered PSH more than 20 years ago with Calayan pump storage hydro. And recently, the more than 6 gigawatt of new capacity has been subscribed under the Green Energy Auction Round 3, which is an amazing achievement. Can you elaborate and explain a little bit about the role that DOE sees in pump storage in the current and in the future Philippine energy system?
Hello. So to answer the first question, the potential of pump storage hydro here in the Philippines. Well, we recognize the potential utilization of pump storage because of the energy transition program of the Department of Energy, where we conduct green energy auction program to achieve the goal of achieving 35% of RE by 2030 and 50% by 2040. So in that conduct of green energy auction program, we recognized the important role of pump storage. That is the reason why we conducted the Green Energy Auction Program 3 that includes pump storage and impounding hydro, also geothermal. And in that conduct of green energy auction program, Henry is right. We achieved over subscription of pump storage because we only targeted an installation of 4,000 megawatts, but we received more than that and we awarded 6,000 megawatts, as well as in the privatization of Kalayaan pump storage that the DOE made a policy or department circular on how pump storage should be compensated. So in that department circular for pump storage, in the conduct of JEA, pump storage will be compensated and paid through a capacity-based payment. So meaning it will be paid based on its available capacity, whether pumping mode or generation mode, and even standby, depending on how the system operator will utilize this pump storage. So whether in the energy market, where it will generate, or in the reserve market, such as ancillary services. So it will be paid on the tariff which they were approved, and that became the bankability or the developer's interest because of the revenue certainty of the utilization of pump storage. So even in Kalayaan, it's the same. The only difference is that in the green energy auction program, the developers or the investors submitted an offered price, which were evaluated by the ERC and finally approved by DOE. While on the Kalayaan, they will submit their tariff and evaluated by ERC. So that's the only difference, but the payment and settlement is the same, as well as the utilization, which will be managed by the system operator, and the payment or the settlement will be handled by the market operator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. It is indeed a very interesting innovation that the Philippines has brought with this new capacity remuneration model. Let me turn to you, Rebecca. You look at policy and research at IHA, and you've written papers on PSH, its potential, the risk around construction and investment. What are your views also on the potential of PSH in ASEAN? And can you explain why the potential doesn't translate into more investable projects?
Quite a question, but I look forward to tackling it. And thank you so much to the ADB for having me. It's my first time in the Philippines, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be here. I won't repeat the excellent comments from my colleague at the IEA. Suan has done an excellent job of that, and I welcomed the remarks from Mr. Takeo Koike talking about the challenges, especially for the region. For IHA, we really see a unique amount of growth happening around pump storage, especially as we're seeing more and more markets recognize the need for primary, secondary, and tertiary ancillary services. The need for inertia especially is becoming quite prevalent in regions where they had existing coal-fired fleets. And so suddenly, as you're seeing less coal come off the system, we're seeing a lot less inertia, meaning there's a lot less responsiveness in terms of this dispatchability with the VRE. So what we see is more oscillations happening in grids. So that's quite a technical thing, but it's important for ASEAN to be starting to consider that, and that's what we're seeing in the region, as many governments are starting to recognize the need both for storage, but also that flexibility services. In terms of, hopefully that kind of sets the scene there, but in terms of why it's difficult, had a whole year to talk about why it's difficult in our pump storage working group and develop that paper, which you touched on. These are projects which are of long lead times. Sometimes they can be really short. In the case of China or India, we've recently seen projects being developed in 4 years, but sometimes they take longer, 10 years. They have development, construction considerations that take a long time to consider, and they have to work both with water, environment, biodiversity, and it often requires speaking to a number of different departments, and that's where a lot of the project scope creep will happen, and I'm sure EDF knows that well in terms of speaking to all the different departments. I'll let Mario touch on that should he wish to. But they also have long lifetimes, and that's the value of a pump storage project. Snowy Hydro in Australia is being constructed for 150 years. And if you wanted to build the same number of batteries, we're talking millions and millions of batteries in comparison. This is a 350 gigawatt hour asset, which will have, it's 2.2 gigawatts when commissioned. So they're really, really big. So it's understanding the difficulties and making sure that you have the project team in place and have the right expertise to de-risk and make sure that you have the right upfront investment in de-risking. So that's understanding your geotech, understanding your feasibility, and making sure that you're able to de-risk. But the risks are known. I should say that. The risks are known, and we can address them, and the industry is well prepared to do so. And so there's things you can do in terms of defining scope, grid reg requirements I've heard a lot about today, and I think that's the issue in particular that will need to be tackled for cross-border pump storage especially, is making sure that government-to-government interaction is considered. And because you have different grid codes, different grid requirements, I think I've heard a number of presenters talk about it over the course of the past days. That's something that I think is a unique requirement, in, especially in GMS, to tackle to make sure that we're able to deliver these projects. And I'll leave those more technical to speak about that, but hopefully that kind of does that. But the real thing is we found in the enabling investments paper was you need to make sure you've got the right markets and regulation. You're working with the governments to plan for that long duration energy storage. You're considering the construction development risks in an appropriate way and getting the right teams in place, and where possible, early contractor involvement to make sure that they're able to plan accordingly and allocating risk according to the project site requirements. So those are some key considerations, but of course, look forward to hearing other panelists.
Thank you, Rebecca, and I think we'll cover some of those in more detail in the discussion. Philip, maybe taking a specific project as an example, you've worked on the Kingston Pump Storage project in Australia. Can you maybe introduce briefly the project and share the challenges that you faced on this project, and how does that resonate with what Rebecca has mentioned, and also how you see that as a relevant lesson learned for project development or PSH development in ASEAN?
Yeah, thank you for the question and for having me here today. So, we're talking about the challenges of pump storage hydro. Probably worth acknowledging at the beginning that this is a technology that's been around for 100 years. There's even plants that are still operating after 100 years. So in some ways, it's one of the most proven ones out there. But we are still innovating, and therefore there will be new challenges that come with that. And I think some of those innovation includes off-river applications, so closed loop, so you don't have an external water supply. It includes hybridization with other sources of renewables and storage, and includes variable speed pump turbines to enhance performance and flexibility. So the Kidston project is great because it includes all of these innovations, and it did so cost effectively, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. We've worked on this project from the kind of original conception and its current capacity through the detailed design and now construction. My personal background is more on the cross-border aspect of the session title than the hydropower, but I'll attempt to represent my hydropower colleagues' contributions to this project properly. I think one key point here is you don't need a mountain to build a pump storage hydro project. A big hole in the ground will do. And I wish I had some slides to kind of show you what this looks like, but essentially this was a former gold mine site. So you had some very deep pits, and the lower pit of this pump storage facility is 300 meters deep in the final development. And the upper reservoir and the lower reservoir are obviously linked through a shaft, a powerhouse, and a tail race. If I had a 3D rendering, you'd see a nice graceful loop of the access tunnel coming down around the shaft. Clearly, the lower reservoir then has top-up water because there is evaporation and seepage, so it's not a pure closed loop. So one key takeaway is around the low capex. So because it's an existing mine site, it has a lot of infrastructure already there. It already has a grid connection, it already has access roads, the pits are already there. So there's a lot of opportunity to save costs, right? There's also the opportunity to reduce the existing environmental liabilities of the current mine site, and obviously a much lower environmental and social impact from the works to put in place the pump storage project. So I think all of these kind of features contributed to that project being cost effective. It is part of the Queensland strategy to have multiple relatively small projects. This is 250 megawatts, 8-hour storage, as opposed to New South Wales, where you've got several gigawatts, centralized, different application. I think it's a nice example of a project being cost effective, delivered on time, on budget, showing that pump storage can be a cost effective part of the energy mix.
Thank you, Philippe. Now I'd like to ask Mario, because you have developed and operate, EDF has developed and operated multiple pump storage assets in some of the world's most integrated power markets. In your opinion, what do you think distinguishes projects that reach financial close, especially in markets moving toward regional integration, from those that stall?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I believe most of you know about EDF. EDF, it's one of the lowest carbon intensive company utility in the world, thanks to 70 gigawatt of nuclear power in operation, 23 in hydros, including 5 gigawatt of pumping storage, and there is 15 plus gigawatts of VRE, solar and wind. Worldwide nuclear fleet is mainly in France and UK, and Taishan in China, where we have 30% of a nuclear power plant. So we have been doing our program on hydro since the creation of EDF in 1946. It was the first industrial program to be materialized. Our teams and the utility remain highly knowledgeable in terms of engineering. So we have been de-risking projects for 70 years now. We invest directly on pumping storage in France. At the time, it was not because the market will be open, and that it can be a lesson for Asian power grid as well, and the multilateral power trade, because at the time an utility on its corporate decision invest on the pumping storage, the reasons are the ones that take to lead the investment. But of course, as those assets last for so many years, they have a different positioning in the market. For instance, in France, it was to pump during the night our nuclear excedents, and then to return back, generate during the day by turbining that. Nowadays, our pumping storage in France are fully committed to balancing the market. They play in the market as it is. So cross-border market integrated in Europe, and so they bid on the different revenue streams that are allowed to do. And so it's a portion of the balancing market that brings, of course, flexibility and integration. So I would say that, of course, the ones that stall and the projects, as per your question, it goes first with the way technically you engage your projects, and it comes to our history and legacy of engineering utility that retain the engineering teams in-house. This allows for, of course, having a huge amount of return of experience thanks to the projects delivered. EDF has been working on more than 30 gigawatt of pumping storage projects in the world as a consultant for third parties in Asia as well, in Thailand and everywhere. Of course, nowadays we are busy with a lot of PSH in development. We have 8 projects under development in Asia Pacific. The most important one and the more mature one, it's the Laos MO5 project. MO5 project is about 30 hours, and I think all of us, most probably in this room, agree that pumping storage positioning is rather more than 8 hours, with 8 hours and cannot be that competitive. So we are looking at EDF on a project 25 hours in Cambodia, 800 megawatt, and this MO5 project that is quite advanced in Laos, which has for 30 hours. That the good positioning, the asset, and to move on because the project is stalling a bit at the moment, not for environment and social reasons or technical reasons, but as a cross-border, then you come to the difficulties, which is the thematic of the enabling cross-border pumping storage, is that to move on, we need to have a political will. So 2 countries that get linked by any link, a tunnel or a transmission line or pumping storage or generation facility, of course, they have to be in full agreement politically to get to connect themselves. And on pumping storage, the difficulty is that we need to project yourself to a future that is not immediate. The project requires a lot of time to develop, but then it lasts forever. The most important thing is that by doing so, you prepare the future. So you can still look at PPA cross-border, which is regulatory aligned with the bilateral agreements of 2 countries. But later on, when the market, the multilateral power trade, the enhanced portion of it will be live, which is going to happen one day, because there has been a huge progress that has been made as we are now. And you know that there will be the pilot, and then there will be the day-ahead market that is going to be implemented. There will be LTMS where private people, sector can bid inside. So we know that at the time that our plant can be returned back to the system through a BOT, then the plant can play fully on an open market. So to the risk and to the ones that moving on, of course, have technical issues that we need to select the best projects in order to have affordable cost. On cross-border, we need this political will, of course, because that makes everything happening behind regulatory and institutional. And then you need a PPA. And the PPA, of course, has to be capacity payment. Otherwise, things cannot move, as it has been explained by Takeo-san, that, of course, in private sector needs visibility on revenues, otherwise cannot materialize. But just to finish, and is happening already on the PDPs, because PDPs is about making your growth, your VRE, and of course you need pumping storage. Otherwise, it cannot offset the program. So in most of countries, you get it already. That's a good milestone. It's easy or more easy for national utilities to invest. We have seen Vietnam, EVN, quite attractive investment on corporate side for Bakai. So that's still easy. When you bring private sector, then of course is where we need to progress much more on regulatory, institutional, and then PPA design.
Thank you, Mario. And so you've mentioned the discussion about the capacity payment. It's a point also that IEL has raised earlier. Would you say that this is the main risk that private lender would push back for PSH, or are there any other risks that you think private lenders would push back as well that you would want to highlight?
Yeah, there is classical. I mean, and there have been most of us, most probably on the session before with Monsoon project and Goodbeck explaining how he did the project. Basically, he was even demonstrating us that he first looked for a bankable PPA and then he looked for a site to implement the project. Of course, lenders will be looking for classical risks and mitigations. In the regulatory framework, of course, on the payment, our revenues are secured or not, on the currency, of course, as well. On bilateral, there will be some attention as well on the let's say in the case that there is a multi-user connector to the next country, in terms of to make sure who is going to pay if there is a delay in one portion of the project, or the overall project, if there is a delay compared to the other one. So it has to be aligned. So in terms of CPs, it will be complex regarding the construction phase and the CPs for financial close. Change in law, always arbitrage international. That is the important classical points as well that lenders will be considering. I think also, of course, experience and what capabilities of the sponsors that are bringing, because it's a technically a very high level technically project. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, the alignment between the regulatory framework between the two countries.
Thank you, Mario. And so you're finishing on the regulatory framework alignment. Maybe digging a little bit on the topic, Xuan, from a regional policy perspective, what is the main gap preventing PSH from being recognized and treated as a strategic flexibility asset within the ASEAN power grid? And in that context, what signals can regulators provide to attract investment in pump storage, and what form of regulatory harmonization could ASEAN realistically deliver in the next 3 to 5 years to support cross-border projects?
Yeah, thanks. And there's a lot in that question. So let me maybe make three key points in terms of what regulators can do to send a clearer signal to investors. So I think firstly, very clear planning for pumped storage hydro, and very importantly, that planning is explicit, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Second, a very deliberate procurement plan. And then finally, I'll touch a little bit on the cross-border element. So firstly, on that planning level, often you will hear us talk about as the IEA that energy projects are, they're usually long lead times. They have a high upfront capital expenditure, and that is true of PSH. So it is important to attract investors, right, and have clear signals to make them want to put the money in. Investors are like moths; they will fly away, and if they get scared and they don't see that certainty. So that importance of that long-term planning and that being very explicitly is clear. And for that, we also say that for national power development plans or any of the regional frameworks, that you explicitly identify the role of pump storage hydropower, particularly from a future flexibility needs point of view, rather than sometimes I think, there's a treatment of storage as a kind of add-on. So I think that very explicit recognition of it is really clear, and that will often require identification of exactly where that long duration storage will be needed. You can set some indicative development targets, and obviously Ariel shared some example already in the Philippines, and then mapping kind of that geological suitability and systems relevant locations. The other thing as well is when they're thinking about the cost benefits of pump storage hydropower and the analysis that's done, I think it's important to assess it not just against generation alternatives, but against the avoided network requirements, investments, the reduced curtailment, the reserve provision that PSH can do, and that greater, as we've already talked about, that cross-border balancing value, particularly given the push on for the ASEAN power grid and that priority for the ASEAN member states at the moment. And then the second point I want to just touch a little bit more on is the procurement instruments, the investment frameworks. Mario's already done a very good perspective on particularly the PPAs, but perhaps also maybe thinking through in the ASEAN systems that we have here, where we've got vertically integrated single buyer markets, of which we do have quite a few in ASEAN. I think that bankability for investors will really depend on them being able to see from regulators creating long-term value procurement pathways. So the investor needs to be able to see that. So that can be exactly as the Philippines have done, some storage-specific tenders with the flexibility options. I think that's been a fantastic mechanism and policy innovation from the Philippines government, DOE. You could have reserve procurement contracts. You can think about mandated utility procurement where justified by investment needs. But I think you need these different instruments from the regulators to show investors that there is going to be revenue certainty, that helps them to reduce that financing risk. And more importantly, and I don't think that's done enough at the moment, is treat flexibility as being essential infrastructure rather than a discretionary capacity, which I think is somewhat missing at the moment. And then finally, on that cross-border side, I think it's great, actually, and I maybe didn't 100% click on this until I saw the heading of this, that, now trying to think of the role of PSH under this broader ASEAN power grid is a really a great way of framing it, because there is a lot of political momentum behind the ASEAN power grid, but there is a real importance there of the potential role of pump storage hydropower, not just from a cross-border element, but also giving that confidence for the domestic power systems for themselves to feel like they're going to be strong enough and have enough flexibility to then be able to export electrons, I think is also has a very clear role for PSH in that context. And I think here, there are some examples that we have been sharing about what's happening in the EU, such as the Clean Energy Package mandate, where it really requires the member states in the EU to assess flexibility more explicitly in each of their national energy plans. They then have a electricity balancing guideline, which establishes the framework for how you do a pan-European balancing market, and then obviously a very explicit enabling cross-border exchange for balancing energy among TSO or transmission systems operators. So some of those lessons learned from other parts of the world may also be helpful to think through. The final point I want to make about that cross-border and the importance of regional cooperation, I think, in a world where so much of the headlines in the energy space is about fragmentation, it's about everyone doing their own thing, it's about, the importance of energy security tied in with national security, I think ASEAN should continue on its path of really trying to stay together and to think about regional cooperation and to emphasize regional security, of which the ASEAN Power Grid is such a key component of. And I think now plugging in the really important role that PSH can play in supporting that overall benefit of trying to reduce the ASEAN region dependence on fossil fuel imports, I think is a really critical moment for us to capitalize on.
Thank you, Suwon. Rebecca, I see you nodding quite a lot. Is there any regulatory framework changes or guidelines from IHA perspective that you would like to add?
Well, I would first of all agree with everything Suwon's just said. Very much we're aligned, and great to hear IEA colleagues also calling for an explicit target of pump storage. We see it being that where the governments aren't being explicit, that's actually causing there to be less recognition of the long-term economic value that pump storage can bring, and on the avoided system costs. This is something that we're looking to do a lot more analysis on, but EY recently published a study that found that if you did 4 gigawatts of pump storage versus 4 gigawatts of battery energy storage in the Spanish grid, the avoided system cost would be, for pump storage, would be 915 million euros. Whereas for BESS, it would only be 435. So it's a huge figure that pump storage is able to support. So very much agree on that point. But in terms of your question about additional regulatory considerations. So we published a paper a couple years ago on sort of high-level policy considerations, which sets out sort of 4 particular barriers. And I heard it addressed, so I'm not going to go over the first one, which is identifying that long-term energy storage needs. Many countries in ASEAN are doing that through their power development plans. Secondly, around permitting and licensing, really tricky long-term. I touched on it a little bit in the first part, but I'll touch on it a little bit more. And it's really great to see projects in the Philippines getting that. It's one of the examples I was going to actually give, but I'll let Ariel talk more about that perhaps. But as an example, for some geotech studies for early stage projects where you haven't even done your feasibility study, to just do a series of boreholes, which in some mining communities, it takes 2 to 3 weeks to get that permit for a pump storage project, which is, we're not even building a tunnel. We haven't even done the grid studies yet. We're just seeing if the geotech is right, 9 to 12 months. So in terms of permitting, that's one of the things that we'd like to see addressed in terms of making sure that we can speed this up, not skip any, we don't want to cause it. IHA was actually founded to support sustainable hydropower. That's one of our core emphasis, and we were one of the core founders of the Hydropower Sustainability Standard and the Sustainability Alliance, which really promotes ESG principles and certification of hydropower. So I do want to say that permitting, it can be streamlined, but it can also be done in a way that still protects environments, communities, and people. And that's one of the core barriers that we see consistent. Some governments are seeking to support this and to speed it in an effective way. We see this in some European countries where they're trying to bring all of the permitting requirements into one department. In government of India has led to a new detailed project report so that all of your permitting is done in one sort of major report that you submit. And so a number of governments are starting to think about that. In addition, we've talked about the bankability, so I'll skip on that. But last but not least, making sure that energy storage is classified within your legislation and you understand how the power system is going to use that. And I think especially in the greater Mekong and with all these grid interconnectors, that's going to be a really important conversation government to government in terms of identifying how these assets will be used and defining it government to government. And of course, I touched on it earlier, these projects sometimes take a long time. So we're having to plan both assets for power systems that don't currently exist. So aligning the plant capabilities with the grid system that's not quite there. It's very complex, and I look forward to the fantastic engineers to help solve those issues. But as Philip said, this is known, and the engineers know what they're doing, and I trust them to be able to address the sort of plant performance with grid specifications as these grids are growing. So there are a few regulatory issues to kind of complement what Suan said as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. And on the regulatory and permitting reform, if I may ask Ariel, if from the DOE experience, what do you see as being the most helpful reforms or permitting reforms to streamline the development of bankable PSP projects in the Philippines, and how can that translate in other countries in ASEAN?
Thank you for that question, Henry. So for the Philippines, for the Department of Energy, we implement two programs on permitting, on acquiring permits. You're right, permits really make delays on our projects, on all energy projects. And if there are really delays, that will be equivalent to high cost of electricity. So what we did in the Department of Energy, we are implementing the EVOS system. It's an energy virtual one-stop shop where the applicants, the developers, can really monitor or see the progress of their applications. Also, the other one is that we issue certificate of energy project of national significance, so that all of these agencies that that requires permits from an energy project will realize that if we certify a project of national significance, they should cooperate, not really to influence them, but to 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 have them recognize the project, and it should be done according to time as scheduled based on their work program.
Ariel. Maybe I'll bring in Philippe and Mario to maybe elaborate on that licensing and regulatory changes requirement from the developer perspective. Is that are there any other risks that, or sorry, or other reform that are key for developers to make the project successful and streamline the implementation? I think Philippe, from the Kidston project, the implementation was actually quite quick. So keen to get your feedback on that.
I think the panel's really covered well the basics there. So maybe I'll move more on to the kind of cross-border aspect of this and the planning that needs to come with that. I think we need to recognize that the pump storage hydro has to be developed in the context of the available transmission capacity and available transmission flows, and that includes the cross-border capacity that is already there and that can be developed. And it also needs to be developed in the context of what renewable resources we're fitting in with and what the program or retirement of existing fossil plants will be. So I think, proceeding there's obviously a lot of regulatory barriers to the ASEAN power grid. It's a work in progress. Integrating our view on the future generation profile, the future storage resource profile, is important to understand what connectors are needed where and how will they be used, ultimately. So I think less a regulatory question, more a planning question. I think I'll come on to later the fact that the profile of alternative energy storage technologies is also a moving target, and we need scenarios around that. But ultimately, we should be adopting a kind of all of the above strategy on energy storage for different applications, and that needs to be part of the whole planning process. Yeah.
Not much indeed, but to mention maybe on our case, because I'm focused, on a single project that we are busy developing it in Laos, and the fact is that we have been through already in one time on Namtan 2 project in terms of permitting and authorizations. The timeline is not on the critical path. On the case of the pumping storage, there will be the line in case of Vietnam offtake. So that one I still don't know exactly in terms of permitting and the way that EVN will deal with the expropriation of land acquisition. So that is escaping from our control, but still otherwise it does not require one single shop for making it happen. The project has long time development, so we still can accommodate all the permitting and authorization steps. Is not in the critical path usually in this one.
Thank you. And you've mentioned the issue around land acquisition and ESG. I'll turn to you, Rebecca, because ESG is of course a critical on the critical path of the project development. What does best practice look like for ESG, community engagement, environmental safeguards, and how can these standards help build early confidence in PSH technology?
So just to kind of touch on what I just said, the International Hydropower Association was founded 30 plus years ago to support the sector in promoting good and best practice for sustainability and identifying and creating technical guides for what does sustainable look like. And over the course of the 30 years, We've helped with non-governmental organizations to create a number of practical how-to guides on dam safety, on environmental impact assessments, on biodiversity, on benefit sharing, and these I've sought this. Their previous iteration was the Hydropower Sustainability Assessment Protocol, HSAP, which some people in the room may know. But in 2021, the sector created a sort of changed into a standard, and it's now known as the Hydropower Sustainability Standard, which IHA was the secretariat for at the time. But in 2023, our colleagues went independent. We decided they are now independent, and so all projects can be certified against and using the standard any size, any type of hydropower, including pump storage, and all of those guides on how to deliver, on how to do benefit sharing, on how to do community engagement, these are all publicly available. And my colleagues at the HSA, acronym for Hydropower Sustainability Alliance, whew, that's a mouthful, they provide a lot of great work with communities, and all projects are assessed independently. And the idea behind that is the standard is aligned with the IMF principles, with the Equator principles, but it's just done for hydropower sector. And using this, they've been able to align with the Green Bonds Initiative, with RE100, and to get projects certified through. So certified projects can also trade for renewable energy certificates. And so using this, it's demonstrating that you are sustainable, that you are providing benefits to your communities, you are using good and best practice. And projects, they get a rating of not only just did you pass, but did you go above and beyond? And so some projects are silver and some projects are gold, just to demonstrate that they have gone above and beyond to support their communities. And this is a way in which any project developers can really consider, okay, how can I also bring in green bonds? How can I also showcase my good and best practice in this? And of course, I'm sure they'd also align with the ADB principles as well on ESG. So this is just an example, but of course, these are independent and third-party assessments, and they provide structured documentation and transparent. So if you want to check out any of the certified projects, all of them are available on the Hydropower Sustainability website. So you can read through sort of the technical reports to find out more, and hopefully that helps other projects in terms of what they need to consider to support sustainable hydropower and get good ESG financing as well. Win-win, I think.
Thank you, Rebecca. Very interesting point on ESG alignment. Before we continue the discussion, I'd like to remind everyone that you can ask questions via the WOVA app under the session page. Maybe to go back to the topic of bankability and delve a little bit on that point. So Ariel explained about the introduction of the capacity payment in the Philippines and how that was addressing the requirement of investors. Maybe I'd like to ask you, Mario, on in markets in ASEAN where there is no major ancillary service market, which is a big roadblock for further developing PSH. How does EDF typically create revenue certainty for PSH in system where that flexibility value is not yet priced in the market, and what policy progresses can help stabilize the market?
I think it was mentioned already before on that one. I don't see as a barrier, to be frank. I think we need first, for the ones that have the vision that pumping storage has to materialize in order to prepare the future, it's time to anticipate, it's time to make it happen. The easiest thing is for transmission operators to finance at corporate level, like EGAT or EVN, if you were to look at our case in Laos. But if they want a private sector to jump in, which is bring also technical capability in our case, as well as external financing. That requires a PPA cross-border and having the plant full in the system of the off-taker, meaning that EVN will be the one dispatching the plant, and in exchange is going to pay a capacity payment to the operator. So the operator will be engaged on, of course, cost, quality, schedule, performances, and the dispatch center will decide to pump up or to turbine. So we can live with that with no problem, and this PPA will be bankable, so the case can be materialized. So that's not an issue. And then at the BOT time, 30 years, 35 years after, the enhanced MPT will be already in place. So the plant will get its a new life, I mean, a new revenue stream for the rest of the term. That's possible. It's basically a single buyer market in France at the time when we did our plants. It was corporate financing, and then the plants are playing in the market. So that there is absolutely no problem. So PPA, it's key. Without PPA, you cannot materialize the project. And then in order to have the PPA, the two governments need to have a will together to engage on cross-border, because we can say that buy things from outside, I mean, even on our daily life, you don't have everything at home, so you go to buy outside your home. But when it comes to store, you don't go outside your home, you just put on somewhere in your house. When it's full or you don't have the conditions, we consider to outsource your storage. But it's a normal reflex to do domestic first. So that's it's understandable. And if you cannot do domestic, or if the cross-border offer, and that is our case in Laos, so we feel that we have a strong case in terms of competitiveness, thanks to these 30 hours, but also that we have already the upper reservoir built at Nam Tan 2 reservoir. So we believe that we are in the price, and that we offer something that it's in terms of competitiveness, something that will be easily competing with the actual 8 hours pumping storage developed in either Thailand or Vietnam. So that's really something, but it is missing this political will. And if I go just one step, because about the bankability that we're talking about, so that is the ingredients to have the case bankable. But we still have the development time. You know, development time and cost, it's really complicated. With the amount of money spent in 5-6 years of developing a pumping storage, you can do 200 megawatt installed of PV ground mounted. It's leverage, of course, or if it was the capex, it's 50 megawatt. But leverage, you can imagine that the amount that you are going to spend at risk and the time would cover the development of a 200 megawatt that we would, after project financed with the gearing whatever of 75, and we would bring the same amount as your own equity to the project. So we are talking here and asking private sector to take care of high risk development that is also related to 2 countries in our case to take decision. So I think, and maybe it's a challenge as we are in ADB at the moment, but it's extended to all multilateral agencies and IFIs, that maybe early stage support from those institutions, or having a fund that would cover, you know, a portion of the DEVEX during this early stage, because as Sjoerd mentioned, it's regional cooperation is key. People are doing, the growing is there. All those links, it's elements of peace in the region, you know, when people get connected to each other. So those IFIs have long-term view. So if there was because private sector cannot change the law or cannot do all the things. You can do the technical stuff, ENS, of course, schedule what has been said, but it becomes intrusive if you came to the governments to say, okay, please change your bilateral agreement with Vietnam because now we want our plant, our development to survive. Whereas, and ADB is helping us a lot, of course, but if there was a funding or even an equity injection in the project during the development, having to show that the case makes sense, and so then the dialogue will become, I think, much more productive, because you would have private sector and you would have also the agencies helping when talking to governments, when making it happen. That could be a selection of projects, especially on binational projects. It requires really someone a bit out of a trusted partner that can really be involved on those capacity building, having also, of course, the ministries on a given country to be fully comfortable, not just the private sector that come and submit a feasibility study, but to have someone also sitting same side of the table, bringing also the framework that goes together to make it happen. That's really, it would, because when I come to Paris every quarter asking to top up the development costs, of course I need to show progress at the same time on the project. They keep looking and progressing on that one, but would really be very, very helpful, like for geothermal, that you can have a fund in order to make sure that your sunk costs are not completely lost. I don't know in which form, but it's a challenge for ADB, for IFIs, to support early stage those bilateral projects. Thank you.
Mario, and very well noted the risk of development and how there is a need for support for the development or for the DevEx, basically. Philip, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think on this whole question of not only bankability, but even getting through the development CapEx, the development expenditures stage. I mean, I think it has become a lot more an interesting discussion the past couple of years as the costs of other energy storage technologies have moved so quickly, right? And I think it's worth tackling that head on, because that is always going to be part of the kind of policy consideration from governments looking to pursue this. And so, more specifically for those in the audience that wouldn't be aware on the progress of battery energy technologies as a potential alternative for parts of the service offering of pump storage. For example, here in the Philippines, we have this Terra Solar project. So this is 3.5 gigawatts, 4.5 gigawatt hours, which is firmed solar. So 50% project load factor, as opposed to the sort of 15 to 20% you could normally get from solar on its own as a percentage of the year. And we're seeing that in the Sun Belt, that's going to extend into baseload. So you're going to see 12-hour batteries, lithium-ion batteries, becoming cost competitive with coal and gas, assuming it's not subsidized, right? So the costs have come down very fast. Therefore, the duration is less sensitive. Now, pump storage can have a lot longer a storage duration. It can even extend into the weeks, right? So it's a different value proposition, but there is some overlap, right? And so that's, I think, a point of sensitivity that we have to kind of understand. And when we're engaging with policymakers, we need to be very clear on the different value proposition that pump storage is bringing versus battery energy storage. And that's going to help unlock those commitments that give us the confidence for DevEx spend and ultimately for sovereign guarantees if they're needed, especially for cross-border plays and ultimately project finance, right? So I think some points from my side on that, and I'm sure others on the panel can have looked into this in even more detail and can add more. I said all of the above, and I think we've heard about the longevity of pump storage hydro projects. The Kidston project is designed for 80 years. Typically, we're replacing our batteries every 10 years, right? So in that 80 years, you'd have effectively rebuilt large parts of the plant 8 times. There's a question there. It's a very different energy security profile. Can you continue to access those batteries with the critical mineral questions as the market massively ramps for electric mobility and for stationary applications. There's obviously a different grid stability interaction between physical inertia and synthetic inertia. There's different cybersecurity risk profile for the different technologies when you're using power electronics versus other kinds of systems. So I think, and this wouldn't apply to all locations or markets, but interseasonal storage is also a big deal in some places. So we've been looking at the Lake Onslow project in New Zealand, which would tackle the problem of the dry year. If for a market that's very dependent on hydropower, you know, interseasonal storage is a kind of critical kind of security component. So I think, you know, there's obviously, you know, a very rapidly moving picture, and, you know, different energy storage technologies can play different roles. And I think it's just being about clear-sighted about where pump storage plays into the mix as alongside the other technologies, because as intermittent renewables come more and more onto the grid, definitely there will be a ton more energy storage coming onto the grid. And what is the mixture of that, and how is it distributed throughout the grid on different points of the grid for different storage durations to complement different generation technologies? Sorry, a bit of a complex picture to paint verbally, but this is where graphs will be really helpful.
Sorry, can I just quickly jump in and just build a little bit on that? I think, Philippe, those are really, sorry, I've got a French person, Philip, not Philippe. I've got to get the pronunciation right. I think that's a really good point. I go back to the start of that, of what I said at the beginning of the session about, you know, where are we at this moment in time? And the truth is, you know, the world has never faced such a large global energy shock. It's the largest global energy shock in history. You know, it is larger than the two oil shocks of the 1970s plus Russia's invasion of Ukraine total together. And it is still ongoing, and we're not clear. Hopefully by the end of this week, there might be some positive news, but it is not clear when this will end. And even if it ends, how stable will it be? And there's a whole bunch of political questions that none of us in this room can really answer. I think in that context, you know, that only adds on to what we had already seen pre-crisis for this region in terms of energy demand growth, electricity demand growth, you know, the need for energy here, for everything from industrial competitiveness and the very large, important manufacturing and economic development programs that governments have, to the basic necessities of not everyone has access to electricity still in this region, although it's really significantly improving, to the simple things about the need for increased air conditioning, you know, more access to cooling, for example. So if you add those things together, that importance of energy security is, of course, very key. And the golden rule for energy security is diversification. It's everything from where you get your supply from, who you get your supply from, the routes from which it travels, and then also really importantly, the types of supply. And in that context, the importance of, as I said, that homegrown domestic energy resources, the importance of variable renewable energy, and then therefore the need for storage. And it is, as rightly as Philip said, there is a role for batteries, and the costs are significantly coming down. The deployment is increasingly going up, but there's also a role for pump storage hydro in there, and defining what that looks like becomes really critical. But I think that context and that messaging, and we will absolutely see shifts in how national, regional, and the global energy market works as a result of this crisis. And part of that now is that story on how we tell that importance of storage, of variable renewable energies, of that kind of diversification. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon, for that very strong message. I think that's very important to highlight it as we near the conclusion of this panel. Maybe before we move on to the Q&A, if I can just ask the panel one question, and if you could just take turn responding to this. So if ASEAN could implement only just one policy, regulatory or market reform in the next 3 years to unlock PSP, what would you recommend that to be? What is basically the most realistic near-term action to materially accelerate PSH? Probably not simple to narrow it down to one. Mario, you're first.
I mean, on national, easy than on binational. On national, basically it's to have a PPA whereby also a tariff system like in Vietnam is implementing, and the projects are already submitting or getting ready to submit. So it's all about giving the private sector the possibility to know the rule of the game and then engage on a bankable PPA. On the binationality, it requires two more, is of course political alignment, and I would bring again the IFIs in the middle to create a full team engaged to promote should a power plant like that, a capacity storage facility like that, contribute to the aim of implementing the ASEAN power grid and the multilateral power trade in the future. So it's time to takes long. So it would help be very helpful in order to align the stakeholders.
Very much aligned with what Mario said. So he stole my two. So instead, I'll focus on another one, which is make sure that your permitting and licensing are done in a sustainable way, but are able to fast tracks and flexible enough that you're able to support these projects. But otherwise, I'd agree it's solving the bankability risk so that private developers feel comfortable enough to join. And of course, there's that wider discussion on government-to-government exchange that's really important in that political will. And on that, IHA has created I didn't touch on it, but a global alliance for pump storage, which has 60 plus organizations, including governments and MDB, ADB, to support this sort of policy development. So just that's a space to watch out for, but otherwise agree with Mario.
And I'm sorry for whoever comes last, which is you, Philip. So you're really going to see your options knocking down as we go through the panel. I think I'll just reiterate the one I said earlier around the importance of including storage explicitly in the national power development plans. I think that's the clearest possible signal that you can give to the market. I think Philippines is a very good example of it. The other one is Vietnam, which has also explicitly recognized and put a gigawatt target in their most recent revised PDP. So I think that's a very important signal.
Okay. For me, the next question always asked for me is that when can we again conduct green energy auction for pump storage? And that's, yeah, we still have to study the result of other auctions, how many solar, how many wind will come in. And from there, we can decide on when and how much the installation target that we will be setting. But of course, as what I have said, it is important to recognize that pump storage and RE plant and a battery and energy storage provides flexibility and stability to the grid. And from there, we can value and compensate the role of pump storage. Thank you.
So I do have another one, and I'm going to approach it from a slightly different angle and be rather expansive in my ask. I'm going to say we should deliver the ASEAN cooperation plan on subsea power interconnection, and that would unlock the cross-border exchange of these energy flexibility services, and particularly because subsea cables are expensive. Several of the HVDC links we're talking about now in ASEAN are multi-billion-dollar investments. You don't want them to be partly used. You want that cable to be fully used. So firm up the power before it goes through the cable, and that's a cost-effective use of the cable. So, I mean, clearly we need to do all the rest as well. But but if we unlock that, then it creates the possibility of valuing that service in a very clear way.
Thank you very much all for your insights, and interesting to see the call for action in the sector to move PSH market forward in the future. We will now move with we're a bit late, but move to the audience Q&A. So let me just read the first question. Closed loop with PSH is already a proven technology. With ENS provision compounded by climate change will make larger open loop storage unviable environmentally, especially country like Nepal Can closed loop be the answer? Again, why have we not seen many closed loop systems, and are there any underlying issue to it? Maybe, Mario, you want to take this one?
I can. I'm not a full hydro specialist. By the way, in the room there will be one which is who is from my team. But basically, there is pros and cons on open loop, closed loop. Of course, closed loop is an issue where you don't renew the water. On our case, in pumping storage in Laos, we annually renew all the 40 cubic million cubic meters of water. So that is positive because then you get the advantage of the closed loop, which is less environment ENS impact. Not change, not need to on a lower reservoir to divert the water out. We can do in our upper reservoir towards the Namtan 2 reservoir. So it's really create all the advantage. We have seen in India initially it was more projects of open loop. Then we see the huge impacts. They try to move to closed loop, and then the impact was even bigger. So now program is a bit more or less open for both. So it's all about multi-criteria analysis. I mean, the IHI is promoting these at EDF. We also do. So the projects need to be weighted on the technical and environment and social components, as well as regulatory, finance. Everything has to be taken in account. And when we prioritize our own portfolio of projects, is based on that analysis. So it requires, of course, hydro specialists, geologists to look deeply on the case in order to weight the different parameters. And then we navigate like this, trying to de-risk one by one on our projects. But we have open loops and closed loops. The math is to see what the impacts are about.
Thank you, Mario. The next question is on PPAs and how would the capacity payment for cross-border PSH be any different from capacity payment from a domestic PSH? Philip, I see you nodding.
Yeah, so I think it's when we're talking about cross-border links, I think it's really important to distinguish between whether we're talking about a grid-to-grid link, so linking two grids, or whether we're talking about generator-to-grid. A lot of the projects we're talking about currently that could incorporate pump storage hydro wouldn't necessarily be grid-to-grid. So for example, there was a conditional award for a project that would bring power from Cambodia down to Singapore, which would be founded on a combination of hydro and pump storage hydro and other technologies, right? So that would be the intent of that project, even though it would wheel through the grid, would be effectively a generator-to-grid project. And then you're using the pump storage hydro as part of the overall generation, and it's a bundled tariff, right? So it's bundled for the energy storage component, the generation component, and the transmission component. So then that's quite different from if we're dealing with grid-to-grid services and selling an energy storage or an ancillary service across borders, right? I think it becomes a lot trickier in the latter example. I mean, in general, to get project bankability, you do need either a kind of clear capacity payment on the transmission and on the storage component, or for the whole set of services to be bundled. Yeah.
Thank you, Philippe. Do we have one more? Okay. We have time for one more question. Maybe this one. We understand that high cost of pump storage hydro will be compensated from variables such as solar. However, the levelized cost of energy of solar is usually at P50, and what banks want is at P90 or more. How do we adjust LCOE of PSH and solar, and so that market price remain fair without distortion? Rebecca, you want to take this one?
take it. Just to clarify, what we normally do when we review the levelized cost of storage for pump storage, we would compare it to other storage technologies. So just to clarify on that point. And typically, some of the ways in which you could help the pump storage argument, and this is something IHA is working on right now, is looking at how the different ways in which the storage asset is considered. So one of the ways we often have to grumble about, shall we say, is that traditional LCOS only considers the storage asset as being operational for 30 years for pump storage, which, as the panel's demonstrated time and time again today, they operate for much longer. And when you consider the equipment, the original electromechanical equipment, we have assets that are operating for 40 to 60 years. So that's something that we're working on, and we should see that the levelized cost of storage for pump storage coming down. And when you compare it for the higher megawatts, so for pump storage and longer duration, so say 1,000 megawatts and 10, 12, 24 hours, the price is much cheaper than BESS, and it's very comparable and very good. It's that what Philip was saying earlier about you really have to look at those longer durations. But did you want to come in as well, colleagues? Yeah, Congress, sorry, that was helpful.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And sorry that few questions we couldn't tackle, but we're running out of time. So maybe to wrap up our ASEAN Power Grid session, I would now like to invite Mr. Priyanta Vijayatunga, Senior Director of the Energy Sector Department at the Asian Development Bank, to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much, Henry. Let me first of all thank all the distinguished panelists for the excellent deliberations here and the discussion. And it's exceptionally substantive, the discussion. And to close this ASEAN Power Grid discussion in this year's Asia Clean Energy Forum. What we have heard is that pump storage hydro is an excellent solution for ASEAN, and if done right, it can help to take the ASEAN power grid to the next stage of maturity. In fact, if I may generalize it, this is not only for ASEAN, but also other sub-regional systems. This is going to be very important and very useful. For those of you who have stayed with us through the day and the three panel discussions in APG, you will know the one message that resonates across the board. That for APG to succeed, we need alignment among all stakeholders, the regulatory, financial, and the government. This is a good time to reflect on what we have heard today across the three sessions, giving us fodder on how to move APG and pump power storage from less talk to more action. We heard that ASEAN Power Grid has made meaningful progress in the past year. Of course, you know our announcement on Pan-Asia Power Grid, which is basically the overarching ambition we have, and APG is part of it. And the expansion of Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore Power Integration Project, new interconnection studies, and stronger political commitment have all been visible. But equally visible are the barriers, especially around permitting, the procurement, the grid codes, cross-border coordination, and supply chain. These are all barriers which have been there for some time, and hopefully we'll be able to overcome them. These are the friction points that now need to be actively tackled by each and every one of you, the stakeholders. Our financiers and developers reminded us that studies, modeling, and concept notes can only go so far in making APG scalable. At the end of the day, the projects need to be bankable to attract private sector investment. As shared in the previous panel, the Department of Energy of the Philippines has been creative in making hydropower storage attractive to private investment, offering plenty of lessons for other stakeholders looking to make their own projects a success. We also heard about successful case studies in Europe on cross-border grids and see how we can replicate and fine-tune them for ASEAN needs and landscape. So where does this leave with us? Across the conversation today, the gaps the speakers highlighted focused more on regulatory clarity, financing challenges, market design, cross-border coordination, and bankable project preparation. These are all areas where ADB can play a catalytic role, as you would have already seen during the panel discussion. ADB can help governments design the regulatory frameworks and market structures that make cross-border projects investable. Now, this is the task of sovereign operations in ADB. We can also support the development of regional standards, planning tools, and risk mitigation instruments that reduce uncertainty of developers and financiers. We can do this as a trusted development partner. We can help countries to prepare projects that are not technically sound but commercially credible. And finally, we can bring our financial structuring expertise to mix and help support APG initiatives through innovative financing tools. If there is one message I would like to leave you all with is that ASEAN has strong ambitions to take the interconnected regional power grid to the next stage. We need more regulatory and technical alignment and more bankable projects to accelerate the progress. We can only do this together. So all the stakeholders need to come together to take this meaningful stride. Thank you once again to all our speakers, our partners, and to all those who are contributing to this such a forward-looking discussion. The work ahead is complex, but the excitement is real. Progress is happening and optimism is high. ADB is committed to staying on this journey with all the stakeholders to help realize the ASEAN Power Grid vision. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing conversations in the years to come. Thank you. Thank you very much.